I sort of felt like I was watching a movie or something like that, and then it sort of ends there. Whereas I realized if I could tell a normal story, and then perhaps, and this is what I'm going to try to do, draw a few lessons out of it, because after having gone through formation, after having been ordained a priest, it's a lot easier, especially now that I'm in a role, to identify in others the way that God is working. It's a lot easier to see how God was working, even in ways that I didn't recognize before. And that actually becomes a lesson to me, and hopefully even a lesson to you guys, because to be honest, these ordinary things, that's what our life is mostly made of. It's hard sometimes to relate to those incredible stories, like Under the Shadow of His Wings, where Father Goldman was drafted into the Nazi Secret Service and had to become a seminarian, or as a seminarian, had to continue his priestly formation as a Nazi military man, and things like that. Well, that's a little harder to relate to. So the things that I'll be saying are normal things, but hopefully will be able to help us to see the way in which God really does work in our daily lives. So that being said, I had a normal childhood, I would say. Normal in the sense that we practiced the faith, and I had my shenanigans and things like that. My brothers and there's five of us, five brothers and then 2 sisters, right? So there's 7 of us all together. Something that really stood out though was when we started homeschooling. Mom and Dad started homeschooling us when I was in 5th grade. And that was when my faith, and I think the faith of our family, really started taking a new path. We got involved with a very good homeschool group in Poway, focused around St. Michael's Church. And it was one of those groups where the cool thing to do was to go to daily mass, and then to pray the Divine Mercy Chaplet on Fridays when we got together at Park Day and things like that. And so that started opening up new doors to me in terms of what the faith was and how to practice it. You can imagine a much different experience than, for example, your typical high school experience, where the cool thing to do is on the opposite side of the spectrum. And so I'm very thankful and grateful to God for that. Reflecting on that experience, I would say it's so important to surround kids with good friends. And all of us, actually, this is a lesson for all of us, I think. None of us are autonomous, and no matter how strong our faith is, we need people who build us up and who support us in that path, and even who challenge us at times. That's a part of who we are as human beings, that social aspect. And so if we're just constantly being combated in our faith or in our views, it's going to, in some way, affect us, if not totally turn us around. And so it's so important for each of us to have those influences, and to give those influences to those who are under our care, like our kids or our grandkids, so that they can have that support and that edification, so to speak, in doing what's good. For crying out loud, I think I'm standing here because of one of my friends who, one of the first days we started going to daily mass, he took me over. He asked me if I wanted to start altar sharing, and I told him no, because I was not interested at all. And so he promptly took me over. He said, "Okay, cool." And so he said, "Hey, I want to introduce you to the priest." And then he took me over to the priest. "Father, this is Matthew. Matthew, this is Father. He wants to altar share," he said, right in front of the priest. And so and I didn't know what to say. I was 10 years old or something, 10 or 11. And I couldn't tell the priest no. And so that's, like I said, I started altar serving. Maybe that's why I'm here. Something beautiful is that when I found out I was coming, when it became public that I was coming back to San Diego, that same friend was the first one to reach out to me and said, "Put me on the top of your spiritual direction list. I want spiritual direction from you," which is really beautiful. Now I'm making him pay for what he did to me. So throughout high school, had all of these beautiful influences, and grew definitely in the practice of my faith. And it was through starting to develop my own prayer life. We were praying as a family when we were going to Mass, but I think it was really through starting to develop my own prayer life. I think Mom and Dad probably testify to this, that sometimes I would disappear for a little bit of time to go pray. And that was where what we would call a vocation really started developing. Since the time I was probably around 14, I pretty much started taking it for granted without really understanding what it meant or anything. I didn't understand much, but I started taking for granted that I was going to be a priest. I started telling people that I was going to be a priest. And that's something that I stuck to, even having graduated a little bit early and then having a year to sort of take off, let's say a gap year, before going to college. I was so intent on that what I started doing was visiting different religious orders, visiting different seminaries and whatnot to see where God was calling me. At that time, I did actually visit Millis Christi. The house in San Diego, the community where I live now, hadn't been founded yet. This was in 2006. The house here would be founded, the community here would be founded in 2008. And one of my best friends, so look how God works, providentially, one of my best friends here in San Diego in our group was from Chicago, and the family moved back to Chicago. And we stayed in touch a lot, and they got to meet the Millis Christi priests who were driving from Detroit to Chicago to preach retreats. They would do weekend spiritual exercises, which is a big part of what we do. They would do day recollections or morning recollections, evening recollections. And so the family got to know the Millis Christi priests. So when he heard that I was discerning and that I was also visiting orders, and he was sort of in the same boat, he said, hey, why don't you come out here and we'll drive out to Detroit together. And so in 2006, was when I was able to actually go visit the Millis Christi community in Detroit. A lot of the priests who are still here in the States were then brothers, so I got to know them. A lot of funny stories. I was an ignorant little high schooler, and so they would always later remind me of the different things I would do. I was supposed to be helping, you guys know, some of you know Father Richard. I was supposed to help him wire some Ethernet cables, and 20 years later, when I came back as a priest, he said, that's the one you wired, it still doesn't work, you know? And things like that. When Father Martin took us around Detroit, a lot of you know Father Martin, he took us around Detroit, and as a brother, showed us all the beautiful churches, and he asked us where we wanted to eat afterwards, and we were totally ignorant. He's from Argentina, and as religious, it's not like we go out to eat very often, and so it's sort of like, wow, I get to go out to eat with these young men who are discerning, and so we said, well, we want Chinese food, and his face just fell. Chinese food. So, but anyways, I found out that he now likes Panda Express, though, so it's probably thanks to us. So it was a great experience, but I actually did lose contact with them. Like I went and visited for about 5 days or so, but I came back and lost contact, and that's when I went off to college. I attended Thomas Aquinas College up in Ventura, a great small Catholic liberal arts school. A wonderful experience at school. My faith definitely developed. Again, being surrounded by a completely solid Catholic community was fundamental. I do have to say that the whole vocation topic was a little bit tabled in the sense that, okay, I'm here for 4 years, so I don't really have to figure anything out. And so the practice of the faith continued, but that aspect of my relationship with God definitely didn't go any deeper. Until I finished college. And all of a sudden I realized, okay, now what? And I didn't have any clarity about where to go or what to do. And why was that? I think it was because, like I mentioned, personal prayer was so important. If we want to find God's will in our lives, the normal way that He's always going to be showing us that or guiding us in that is going to be through our conversation with Him in prayer. Now, He's not going to necessarily speak back, but He has so many ways of tugging us or showing us, giving us clarity and whatnot. That's how He works in our soul. And too often we expect things from the exterior to just sort of doors to close and doors to open, or an angel to appear, or these kinds of things. Someone could just randomly say, like, I think you should be doing this. And they're like, oh, okay, good, that's a sign from God. Well, those kinds of things can happen. God definitely works through exterior things. But the normal way that He works is in the interior. And as a matter of fact, all of those exterior things need to align with what's going on in my interior. Because just because someone came to me and said, I think you should be a priest, doesn't mean I have a vocation. It could be a sort of sign, but if God's work in me isn't showing me that, then that's not a solid sign of a vocation. And same thing in any kind of discernment in our life, if we're trying to find God's will. It needs to be rooted in our own personal time of prayer with the Lord. And that's something that I think at TAC, at Thomas Aquinas College, I wasn't as in tune with. And so coming out, I was still definitely strongly practicing the faith, but not as aware of how he was working in my life and where he wanted me to go. So I did the natural thing, and I started working as a computer programmer, which has nothing to do with anything that I studied or whatnot. We had a good family friend who had a software company and offered me a job. So I started working there, and then I worked at a construction company after that in the admin headquarters. And that's when, backing up. So right when school ended, that same summer, this was 2008, right when college ended, was when Millis Christi, so here's how Providence works, right? Was when Millis Christi founded the community here. And so I remember, I don't know, maybe Mom and Dad can fill in details here, but I remember, I think you guys said, hey, some good friends of ours are hosting a sort of welcoming party for some priests who just arrived to the area, the Valentes. Would you like to go? I said, okay, sure. Just recently graduated, didn't have anything on my schedule. So I went, and when I got there, my jaw dropped. I was like, whoa, I know you guys. These were the Millis Christi priests who I had met as brothers back in the day, before college. And so I started started talking. Some of you know how Father Martin is, right? Father Martin is very good at talking and then being like, so, where are you going with your life and whatnot? And so he offered me spiritual direction, which I started, or through Dad, actually. That's true, Dad. That was, shout out to Dad for that one. Dad got me involved in spiritual direction shortly after that, and so I was working with Father Martin to try to continue my discernment, basically. And that's when it got to a point where Father Martin was realizing, okay, I'm assuming he was realizing this, I can see it now looking back. Computer programming is great, working at a construction company, great, but that's not probably really helping you. So, especially a construction company. So he said, why don't you come and work for us? And so if you've ever been to our old offices in Sorrento Valley, that's where I was working for 5 or 6 months or so. Discerning what to do. And so, at that point, maybe I was already deciding, because I was already working for Millis Christi. And the final step was I had visited the House of Formation. We have now 3 communities in the United States. We have our original community where we started in the States, out in Detroit. It's also a House of Formation. So any young men, American men who want to join Millis Christi do about a year and a half, 2 years of humanities and Spanish studies out there in Detroit. We have a community recently founded in August in Denver, and then obviously the community here. So I had visited the House of Formation in Detroit, and the final step was I think I told Mom and Dad, okay, well, I'm gonna go visit for a month now. And then I was like, but I don't think I'm coming back. And that's what happened. I never came back. So I went for a retreat for Holy Week, stayed a month visiting, and then just ended up staying. And that's where, even there, continuing to do that discernment of trying to see exactly what God was doing. Obviously, that's something that continues throughout formation, actually. But finally, in September, I think was when I made I started classes and everything. That's September of 2011. Perhaps it could be interesting in this way also, you get to know a little bit more about Millis Christi, what it is that attracted me to the order. I liked the fact that, there's sort of 2 levels. There's you're a kid more superficial level of like, wow, they're all young. Oh, they're all happy. Oh, they're all normal, and things like that. That was obviously very, very attractive. I had never played a soccer with a priest before like visiting Mills Christi, and that was really, really neat. But as I got to know more about the order, and this is obviously the most important part, was that I really loved the charism. So you know that in order to found a religious order in a church, in order for one to be born, it needs to come along with a charism, which is a certain, let's say, mission within the church. You can't just say, I'm going to make a religious order of priests, and what are you going to do? Well, we're going to go around and be priests. Well, no, you have to have a specific goal for why you're coming together. And so the Missionaries of Charity, they serve the poorest of the poor. The Dominicans dedicate to preaching and teaching and things, so on and so forth. So Mills Christi, our charism, is the sanctification of the laity. So it's a heavily apostolic community or institute that is working for others, a sort of service, especially in our the way it's phrased, especially college students. So, and that's typically extended sort of to mean also especially the youth, right? So that's why hence also our work in high schools. We work at a lot of colleges and with young adults in general, our focus. That greatly attracted me. I always loved working with the youth. I was involved a lot with different CCD, teaching CCD and whatnot at my parish after college. Another thing that really attracted me was our spirituality. So every religious order takes on a spirituality within the church. The Carmelites follow St. Teresa of Avila and St. John of the Cross. The Dominicans obviously follow St. Dominic. The Franciscans follow their founder, St. Francis. And so we follow the spirituality of St. Ignatius of Loyola from the 16th century. St. Ignatius of Loyola, who founded the Jesuits. That's our spirituality. And it's a very, what I always found it to be, and it's not that the other ones are not, but at least the way it attracted me was it's a very solid spirituality. St. Ignatius was a military man, and everything that he does is like direct and to the point, and just go do it kind of thing, with the grace of God, right? Counting on the grace of God, obviously. But it's not about, if you read St. Ignatius, he'll say like, okay, don't just resist temptation, like fight it back kind of thing, like take it into its own enemy territory, things like that. So I found it to be a very solid way of living out my faith and of growing in my relationship with God. I also greatly liked the means that we use. So we have what we call privileged means of doing our apostolate. So for us, when we think of, well, how am I going to serve the faithful, it's typically going to fall into a category of things which are our privileged means. The first one is preaching the spiritual exercises, which is these silent retreats that we do. We preach, now there's 9 of us in the States, and we do around 60 per year throughout the entire United States. So it's a big part of what we're doing on the weekends. Very powerful. If you've never been on one, highly recommend it. It's a beautiful retreat, unlike anything you've ever done. And it's a completely silent and guided retreat in the sense that St. Ignatius has given certain meditations to do at certain times in order to clear the path to God, in order to find Him better, to make us more like Christ. So the spiritual exercises are one of the first things. The second thing is spiritual direction. Spiritual direction has been called, or is called, the art of arts, because you're not just giving someone a little bit of guidance. You're not telling them how to kick a soccer ball or something like that, but you're giving them guidance for their life, and not just their life in general, but their life especially in its relationship to God. That is, how do I please God in my life? Or how do I overcome these obstacles that are keeping me from pleasing God in my life? And it's a very, let's say, involved and delicate, and you need to know what you're doing kind of thing, right? And that attracted me, because in a certain sense, it always sounded to me like, or at least the way I imagined it, was like the Navy SEALs or something like that, right? Because you really have to go through a training in order to be able to guide people in this way. Now that I actually do it, I don't know if I'd still compare to the Navy SEALs, but anyways. But when I was small, yeah. But a beautiful apostle, a beautiful way of helping people, because it's one-on-one. You're showing, okay, I care about you, and I want to help you in your relationship with God. And so that's something that we do, especially, again, targeting the youth. As a matter of fact, I think it was mentioned we work at Chudassin High Schools at Modern Day down in Chula Vista, here at Cathedral in Carmel Valley, Cathedral Catholic. And one of the main things, we obviously offer the sacraments all throughout the week, but one of the main things our time is used for, just on a daily basis, is doing spiritual direction with the high schoolers. So I think if you look at our list, I mean, we explain to the kids at the beginning of the year what spiritual direction is and how they can use it, and we give out a sign-up sheet. I think if you look at our list right now, there's like 150 kids that we meet with on a regular basis. So, which is very encouraging. I think that it's beautiful to see that even just that many kids would want to come talk one-on-one with the priest. There's a whole social aspect too, because we call them out in front of the whole class to come to spiritual direction, so they have to really want to come talk to a priest. Definitely had a few times where the kid looked at me and was like, not today. All right. So, and then the last, let's say, area that we really work in and put emphasis in is formation groups or Catholic formation of any sort. So we'll do summer camps, for example, but that won't be without its aspect of also taking time to help form the kids in their Catholic faith. Or we'll do other activities. We'll put on mornings of recollection, or directly formation groups, where we just get together with small groups and we go through the different elements or aspects or beliefs of the faith and practices of the faith, all a big part of what we do. So we have those principal means, and that's what we spend most of our time doing as Melissa Christie priests, really. Besides, obviously, our own personal prayer life, which is to us much more important than those things, because if I don't maintain my prayer life, then I won't have anything to give to anyone. And then also our community life. As a religious order, we're obliged to live in community. And so we always have this support, this fraternal support of our brothers. Not only on a human level, which is very helpful to not go back to an empty house, but also on a spiritual level, that we share the same spiritual goods. We're aiming for the same thing. And so to be able to talk to brothers and get their advice or their encouragement or whatnot is obviously very helpful as a priest. All right. Something that stands out in this whole process of my discernment, leading up to entering Miller's Christie, even in Miller's Christie, I'd have to say, is the support of my parents. So big shout out to my parents. But what I learned from that actually was how important it is for parents to have the, let's say, docility to God in what God wants for their kids. That is not pushing in one direction or another. I always felt totally supported by my parents, no matter, if I was entering seminary, or if it turned out I wasn't entering seminary, or if I entered seminary and it turned out that it actually wasn't my vocation. I never felt any pressure either way, but just the support of like, hey, do God's will. Like, that's what's most important. And that was really helpful for me. In seminary, I encountered other brother seminarians who didn't have that, whose parents were adamantly against them entering seminary, and it was a very huge cross for them. And so, if I could, another lesson, I guess, to draw from that is no matter what our thoughts or desires for a child might be, what's most important is what God's thoughts or desires for that child are. And so we really, and especially parents, have that role, parents, grandparents, of fostering that idea of just like, you want to do God's will, and of course giving them all the elements that they might need to be able to find that's true, but not necessarily saying like, hey, you have to go in this direction, or this is what we're expecting of you. because that's not the ultimate. We're not the ones to set the goal of a person's life, right? God is the one who calls and gives that vocation. Throughout seminary, like I said, our seminary, our formation is long. I think mine was just around 9.5 years, maybe a little bit over. And it started in Detroit, but then it took me down to Argentina. I was there for 4.5 years. That's where we study philosophy. That's where we do novitiate. Novitiate for us religious is like our spiritual boot camp. So you don't do anything that's not true. You're not like given over to, you don't give your time to study. You're not doing active apostolate, like going out and running groups or anything. You're more just dedicating your life to prayer and simple work at the formation house. So we have 2 years of novitiate. So we had a few years of philosophy and then 2 years of novitiate down there in Argentina. And then a huge grace of being able to go to study in Rome for theology. So I was in Rome for 3 years. Talking to Father Gus, he got really excited because we actually studied at the same university. So it was a huge blessing to be out there. A great boost in I don't know, the way I said it was like every morning we would go to Mass at St. Peter's and then walk through the historic part of Rome to get to our college. And it was like getting an injection of pure faith every morning, right? It just like lifts you up when you see the way that Catholicism has manifested itself in all the paintings and all the buildings and all the practices and whatnot. It was an incredibly beautiful experience. And not to mention, it goes great hand in hand with all the things you're learning because you're studying theology. You're studying the science of God. All of that time of seminary was wonderful. It obviously had its challenges, but I see that, looking back, that was necessary in order to continue to sort of, how would I say it, make the vocation shine, make it sort of unearth more and more. In this sense, a vocation, what I realize, especially looking back now and working with other young men and women who are in a similar situation, and vocation is really like a seed. It starts as a seed. God somehow gives you an idea or a tug or whatnot, but that's just the beginning. And that vocation, which in our case is not just a vocation to the priesthood, it's a vocation of consecration because we're religious. We have vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. That vocation is something that God, that so to speak, takes deeper and deeper root. And as you go through formation, as you grow in prayer, in your life of prayer, as you also encounter obstacles and challenges, then that actually helps it to take more firm root, and the tree grows more and more, and hopefully even to the point of eventually, and this is God willing, where we're all at now in our vocation of priests in the community, where it gives fruit as well. When you're in seminary, it's all about forming that and letting it sink in, and now it's at the point where it should also continue, obviously, to sink in, that's obvious, but also starting to give fruit. And so, in that sense, a lesson that I always draw from this is that I didn't understand any of this when I was a kid, but it's so important to guide that process and to help in that process, because it isn't just like, oh, you felt a tug from God, and then so that's necessarily going to follow these steps. Well, no, it depends on how we respond to that vocation, how we work it, and how we allow it to grow, how we give it the elements in the same way you would water a tree or give it sun and whatnot, so that it can really start coming forth. All of that is very necessary. So God does his part, for sure, but we also need to help it and give it the right soil and whatnot. Another thing I think I didn't really realize back in the day is that really, though, there was so much that God was doing. It was easy to fall into thinking sometimes of the vocation as like choosing a career path or something. And so this idea of sort of shopping around for religious orders or what do I like and that kind of thing. Well, no, there's actually a lot more about what God wanted of me. And that's something that I realized a lot more in seminary. And as the call, let's say, intensified, it became very clear that this is exactly what God wants of me. Like nothing else makes sense. Not because I had chosen it and because I felt attracted to those things I mentioned earlier, although I did. but more than anything because God wanted it of me. He was asking this of me. And that's what a vocation is, properly speaking. So there's this aspect of recognizing where God is working, respecting that work, but then also giving all of the elements and the help necessary so that that work can flourish. And that's something that now we try to do, obviously, as spiritual directors with the youth. There's something, as I say this, I'm thinking, oh, this is neat to know. There's something actually, I think, practical for everyone here, which is that every vocation has something similar. It might not be a call to total consecration in the same way that vocation of the religious life, but marriage, the vocation to marriage is something similar. Right? When the people here who are married, when you got married, so you probably admit it was sort of more like a little seed. You might not even know exactly what you're getting yourself into. But through that deepening of my own maturity on a human and spiritual level, and through God's grace working, then that vocation, we should be basically allowing, giving the space for that vocation to take deeper root and to find God and have my way of glorifying Him more and more through that vocation. That's what the vocation is for. That's why God calls us on a path, because it's going to be our way of giving Him glory. And so, in a real sense, I think everyone is going to be able to relate to this way in which God works in us through the mission, through the call that He's giving us. Because He is calling each of us in a specific way to holiness, not just in a generic way, but in this specific idea that He has for us. The point is and a prayer is to be faithful to it, to be faithful to it until the end. So, thanks be to God. I was ordained back in November of 2020, and like I said, there were definitely obstacles, but I always see those obstacles that God gave as really reaffirming and encouraging the vocation. I always joke that two of the biggest moments that like really reaffirm vocation are, first of all, when you're down in Argentina and you have to take the bus. Somehow the Argentinians, they have this system, they have this thing figured out, right? But I was always the last one on the bus. I was always the one like with his face like smashed against the door as it closed. And so I don't know what they did to get it that way, but as you're on the bus for an hour watching Argentinian countryside pass by, there's like all these existential questions pass through your head, and you're like, what in the world am I doing here? And so that was a big moment of just like reaffirming, okay, no, God wants me to be here, and that kind of. Another one is, this was after I was already ordained, but another one is when you do a camp for high school girls. That's always reaffirming of your vocation, when you're sitting at the campfire and everyone around you singing Disney songs, and you're wondering, what in the world am I doing here? But no, then there were obviously more serious challenges, but thanks be to God, we got through those. I guess I would say, summing up the past 2 years, that the priesthood is awesome. God does so much good through a priest. Something that struck me, and has just been, it really struck me at the beginning, that you start getting not used to things, but you start realizing, okay, this is just the way it is. But at the beginning, when, for example, I would be offering confessions, and a 80-year-old man would come and kneel down in front of me and ask for me to hear his confession, and I'd be thinking, well, who in the world am I to hear your confession? What do I know? But he wasn't looking at me, because if he only saw me, he probably would have run in the other direction. But he realized a representative of Jesus Christ, and that's the power of the priesthood, is that the things that we do as priests isn't us doing it. It's allowing God, especially in the sacraments, especially in things like spiritual direction, but hopefully in everything that we do, allowing God to work through us. And as having felt that call to really be a part of the salvific mission of Christ and sharing the good news with others, it's like there's nothing more beautiful then, because that's the most powerful way of sharing it. I mean, if I can say Mass, it's way better than if I could, go on the street side and recite a Bible verse or something like that. Saying Mass is the most salvific action that we can possibly do. The same thing with offering confessions and the other sacraments and whatnot. Another thing that really stuck out to me is being able to give last rites. My very first one was a victim of COVID, and it was very impactful. Not so much, more than anything, because she was a fantastic person, and she was ready to die, and she was happy, and she was surrounded by her family praying and everything, and that was like super. It's like, wow, I want to die like that. But being able to help those people in their last moments is also incredible. Something else that at least I particularly find very, very beautiful and I love doing is not just to work with the kids at, for example, Cathedral in my day, but the possibility of being there, or let's put it this way, not just being there for the people who are looking for us, but for the people who might not be looking for us, or who are looking for us and don't know it. And so I've actually, God has given the grace of being able to work with 2 girls right now who are coming into the church, who haven't received any sacraments. So one's coming in at Easter, another, God willing, we just started meeting, but we'll be coming in, we'll be baptizing her here at some point, maybe towards the end of the semester. And then being able to actually receive another girl back into the church. So she left the church and was going to a Protestant church. And so through talking to her, then I was able to receive her back into the church and have sort of in orbit, let's say, right, quite a few people who are interested in the faith, but we're never baptizing or not. So they're asking questions. And that's really beautiful to be working with them. So if you can keep all of them, especially in prayers, I mean, all the kids that we work for, but especially them, that would be awesome. And the last sort of lesson, I think, would just be to pray for vocations. We need more priests, but we need more diocesan priests, we need more religious priests, we need more Millis Christi priests. So please just remember to pray for vocations, because one priest can do so much and can do so much good by letting God work through him, and there's just not enough manpower sometimes. We have to say no to a lot of things because we just can't do enough. So yeah, please pray for vocations. So I think that wraps up like my story. I wanted to give a few, what time do we have until?
You have a few more minutes for sure, like 10, 15
Okay,
minutes.
I wanted to give a few thoughts on Lent. I couldn't figure out the way to segue into that, so I just, because I'm a priest, and so I was like, well, I don't want to just talk about my vocation story. But I'd like to say a few things about Lent, and just encouraging and hopefully maybe giving some tips on how to continue to use this Lent. Now we're in the middle of Lent, but how to continue to use this Lent well. So just a reminder that Lent is a time of preparation, and we're preparing for the most important time of our year. Not in order to understand that more deeply, we need to remember that we're not, when we talk about preparing for something in the church, we're not talking about just like celebrating something or remembering something. We're not at Easter going to be just recalling the fact that Jesus died for us and that he rose again, which is obviously the center of our faith. So first of all, what we're preparing for is the most important moment of the year. But second of all, not in the sense of just, oh, we're going to get together and we're going to celebrate the fact that Jesus did this. That's not what our Christian preparation is totally about. That's a part of it. And so there's an aspect of decorating the church and all the exterior preparations and whatnot. As Christians, though, because of the fact that the mysteries of Jesus Christ are also our mysteries, that's the way that beautiful phrase that spiritual author Don Columba Marmion puts it that way. He says, the mysteries of the life of Jesus Christ are our mysteries. That is, we're meant to participate in, to sort of tap into them, and to live them out in our own lives. So when we hear that, then all of a sudden things like the idea of the cross makes a lot more sense. We're called to carry our cross as Christians and to participate in Jesus carrying his cross. But we're also called to participate in the resurrection. And so in order to do that, it's going to imply also a spiritual preparation. Because come Easter, come the Paschal mysteries, hopefully we're able to delve into, not only through meditation and whatnot, but even just the way we live our life, like St. Paul says, by rejecting sin, by conforming ourselves to God's will, we can participate in the death and the resurrection of Jesus. We have Lenten practices. That's what the church has always encouraged us to do, as a means of helping us do that preparation. But I think we have to admit that sometimes it's very easy to make our Lenten practices just become a sort of routine, or a sort of just, okay, this is what I'm doing, and as long as I check off the boxes, come Easter, I'm good. Because I did everything I said I would do. That would be good, but it could go deeper. And so I wanted to just leave you with 3 things maybe to reflect on, 3 areas to look at that are more like attitudes or virtues or things that hopefully our Lenten practices are helping us with. Because if they're not, then we run the risk of having a very superficial Lent. And to the contrary, the better our Lenten practices help us with these things, the better we'll be able to celebrate and to participate in the Easter celebrations. So the first one is acknowledgement of sins. That's something that, acknowledgement and rejection of sin, that's something that Lent asks us to do. And if you pay attention to the different prayers at Mass, which is a beautiful way, by the way, of understanding the mind of the church. If I want to know what the church wants me to think and wants me to be feeling, then we should pay attention to what those different moments where, not the readings, yes, but I'm talking here more of like the opening prayer when the priest says, let us pray, or the prayer at the end, or the preface right before the Eucharistic prayer. Those all change from week to week or celebration to celebration. And that's where the church expresses what she wants us to be experiencing and going through as well. So if we listen to those prayers very carefully, we'll realize that over and over and over and over again throughout Lent, we're being called to this sort of repentance, to this acknowledgement of our sins, and to rejection of it. As we start practicing our faith more, perhaps even doing things like praying, obviously on a regular basis, but maybe praying the rosary on a daily basis, or going to Mass throughout the week, or things like that, we can start building up a sort of wall of pride. Not a huge one, but let's say after I've given myself to the practice of faith, and I've given myself to Jesus Christ, we can start thinking like, well, things actually aren't going that bad. I'm doing okay. As a matter of fact, if I look back over the week, every time I said I wanted to go to Mass, I went to Mass. Every time I said I wanted to pray the Rosary, I prayed the Rosary. And so on and so forth. And that can actually lead to a sort of spiritual pride, we call it. And that's very dangerous. And so Lent is a moment to step back and to realize, wait, I'm not all that I make myself out to be at times, or I'm not this Saint Teresa, new Saint Teresa of Avila, or whatever it might be. I have things that I still, ways in which I offend God, and I need to acknowledge that, and I need to reject that. And so that's an attitude that as Christians, we're always going to be able to go deeper into. It's not a sort of gloomy, dismal, like, oh, I'm a sinner, and we have to now walk around like looking at the ground and beating our breasts out everywhere. No, it's just an acknowledgement of the fact that I have a fallen human nature, and I continue to give into temptation and things like that. If you look at the lives of the saints, even though they were saints, this is something that they stand out for, being able to acknowledge their sins, and even better than we do. If you look at the Curie of Ars, St. John Vianney, who lived in Ars, people flocked from all over the world to go see him. They were in line for days to go to confession with him. He would read people's souls, and he would literally run into the woods and try to escape. And he said, "Just let me go out and cry over my poor little life." That's what he would say. And he said, "Well, what could you have possibly? What could you have to cry over?" Well, no, he had gone deeper and deeper into this contrition for his sins, right? Realizing that any way in which I offended God was an offense against God, and that's worth crying over, so to speak, okay? So that's something that we have the possibility during Lent to go deeper into. We also have the possibility to go deeper into a reparation for sin, something we're probably familiar with, this idea of making up for past offenses. If I've confessed my sin, it's forgiven. The degree to which the punishment, right, there's a punishment that comes along with sin, The degree to which that punishment is wiped away, though, depends on my contrition, depends on how sorry I am for my sin. So perhaps when I was younger, I confessed a sin because I knew I had to confess it, and I didn't want to go to hell or something. Okay, well, that sin was forgiven. It really was, as long as there was a minimal ounce of sorrow. But now that I realize that how much that offended God, or now that I realize I really wish I hadn't have done that, well, we can make reparation for that, and take away the punishment that was due that perhaps wasn't taken away because I wasn't that sorry, if that makes sense. And so through our Lenten offerings, especially through our practice of virtue, through our perhaps sacrifices that we're doing, we have this possibility. It's sort of like a double whammy. I'm not just giving up chocolate for Lent, but I'm also offering it for something. I'm offering it for the reparation of sin, my sins or the sins of others. Something that we can say at the beginning of Lent, but that it's also good to renew that. Why am I doing this? That helps us to not fall into just a routine of okay, I'm not going to eat that, or I'm not going to listen to this music, or whatnot. Well, why? Well, when I offer that up, it's good to let's say, recall that, present it to God again. I'm offering this, not having chocolate, or whatever it is, in order to make up, in order to reject, in order to show my sorrow and ask for forgiveness, a renewed forgiveness for my sins, okay? Reparation for sin. In that sense, too, it's actually also really good to aim our Lenten practices at the areas in which we perhaps fall the most. Something interesting, nice about the reflection here, we have a whole bunch of different areas, and we might not be able to work on all of them, but it doesn't, in our Christian life, it doesn't make as much sense to, let's say, offer up wine if I don't even like wine, or if I never, well, that's obvious, but let's say if I don't drink that much wine, or if I'm not, let's say, attached to wine, okay? So, but at the same time, I'm totally attached to something else over here, like ice cream, and doesn't even cross my mind to offer that up. Well, that would be a much more powerful offering, and it'd be much more helpful for me in this process of purification of Lent to aim my penances, aim my sacrifices, aim my practices well, okay, at where I'm being tempted or where I'm falling the most. And that leads to the last idea, which is Lent is meant to be an opportunity to detach ourselves more and more from this world. What does that mean? As Christians, we know that we were made for heaven. We weren't made for this world. It's not our final resting place. But what can happen is that on our journey here, since we need to use good things, like we need to eat, we need to have friends, we need a car to get around, and all these kinds of things. But what can happen is that my heart becomes absorbed in those things, and it forgets that they're supposed to be just a way of helping me to get to heaven, and that's actually my final goal. And so we can start making these things, so to speak, little final goals in and of themselves. And that's dangerous, because that roots us into this world. As Christians, we're meant to be rooted in heaven. Tertullian says that a Christian is like an upside-down tree. And what does he mean by that? He said, well, instead of having roots sunk in the earth, we need to have roots sunk in heaven. Okay, so that's what detachment is. This healthy, okay, I'm here on earth, I use all the things here on earth, but my heart is not focused on those things. My heart is not set on those things. And so Lent, by removing certain things from us, or by practicing certain sacrifices, or whatever it is that we're doing, almsgiving, all these kinds of things, works of charity, I remind myself that I was not made for this earth, but rather I was made for heaven. And so it's a very important attitude to double check. As a matter of fact, again, these different things that I mentioned, I would recommend doing an examination on those throughout Lent. Because if my practices aren't helping me increase in any way, then maybe they're not the right ones for me, because these are the more important things, these kinds of attitudes. And I should make sure that I'm slowly, even if just a little bit, but slowly progressing in that. So that I'm better prepared, right, more purified, so to speak, to encounter our Lord at Easter. That's what I had to say. And yeah, I think that's it. I don't know.